Happy fall, YouTube. I am gonna take a quick stroll up to the barn and do a video today that I've had in mind for a while to talk about how I planned out my garden area and how many plants I needed. I've had this question a lot on my channel, and I just want to talk for a few minutes about how I came up with my plans. So I'm going to run this video from up near the barn so that I'm kind of showing the way that I planned it from the view that I had when I started to break down my crop area. Initially, I thought I would plant this area down here, I would plant this area up here on a hill, and then I would plant this area on either side of the fence down there. I called the first area Zone 1, Zone 2, and then Zone 3 down here. It was fine to mark out the acreage. I think it was 0.72 acres is that space down there, so not quite an acre for all three zones. When it came down to it, that first zone was on a hill, and after I got up there with the plow and the tiller, it just didn't feel safe to me. It didn't seem like a really feasible place to pull the raised bed maker, and I ended up downsizing my original plan just to include this zone right here. Now I'm just going to take a quick walk to the house and pull out my notes on my computer and show how I decided how many plants I was going to fit in there and how I planned out my crop area. The reason it's important to plan out your crop area is because seeds are expensive. Seeds can be over $1 a piece, and seedlings can be anywhere from $3 to $5 a piece. So you don't want to order more than you need. You don't want to order extra. You do want to plan for dead loss, but you can't really compensate for that with extras because they've got to grow in the ground somewhere too to grow. So it's important to know how many seeds you can put or plants you can put in your crop area before you get started. In order to get my permit with the Department of Agriculture, I had to have a planting plan on paper. I drew up a sketch of that area, including all three zones, that took advantage of the terrain for irrigation, but also included a plan for drip. It was not for quantity purposes so much, but just to represent what I was going to do down there. They also wanted to know how many plants I was going to put down there, and I just gave it my best guess for permitting purposes. I had read that an acre could fit 1,200 plants, and I had 0.72 or 0.78 acres down there, so I just guesstimated that I would have 1,000 plants. Once I figured out that I was just going to end up using Zone 2, I was able to come up with a real planting plan. Then I came and I sketched that planting plan on paper. That paper plan guesstimated that I was going to have 6-foot rows center to center, and my plants were going to be spaced 4 feet apart and staggered amongst the rows. I chose 4-foot spacing because it was my first year of planting. Based on talking to other farmers in the area in their first seasons, they weren't having like really bushy plants that needed to be 6 feet apart, or they would touch or be overcrowded. And I just kind of expected that I would have the same season, so I also went with a 4-foot spacing plan between the plants. If I could have squinched the rows closer together to 4 feet apart, I would have done that, but that was really dependent on the width of my tractor tire. I decided that I was going to go 6x4 on a grid. I mapped that out on paper a couple of different ways. I mapped it so that I had 200-foot long rows, which gave me 15 rows, and I mapped it where I had 80-foot rows, which gave me 29 rows, but 2 of them were half rows, so really 28 rows in total. Having my plan on paper really helped me in coordinating with the people who would know how to help me make those decisions, which was the drip irrigation company. In talking with them, I was able to send them my sketches and talk with them about the terrain and the hill and, the water pressure that I had. And they were able to give me some really good advice. Now, 200-foot rows would mean less valves and things like that. But, there was also a concern that I would not have enough pressure to fill the drip tape for a full 200-foot run. They thought it would be better for me to do the shorter runs. And at the end of the day, it was really good advice. Plus, it did take advantage of the natural drainage from the terrain in the field. The other reason that it was beneficial to have it mapped out on paper was that I was able to come up with the quantities that I was going to need for drip tape, valves, source line, all of that, plus know how many plants that I could fit in that space. I didn't really trust myself to just map it out on paper, so I kind of came up with a version of that in a spreadsheet where I could calculate quantities based on the spacing that I anticipated. And that's how I arrived at the fact that I was going to be able to fit 500 plants in that area. In typical fashion, there is a big difference between throwing something on paper and being out in the field. At one point, I did go and buy some utility flags and go down and mark with utility flags where each plant would go based on the spacing I anticipated, just to be sure. And it was kind of a waste of time, but it was a nice experiment, and I'm glad I did it because there were things that I hadn't really thought of on paper that I was going to run into whenever I got down there and practice. And that would be that, I started my rows right up against the fence. Well, I needed, another 3 feet there in order for the tractor to fit in. And then there were some other hazards down there. There's a hole where some wash had occurred on the back side of the fence that I was going to lose a couple of plants there. I had accounted for that, but I didn't know how many plants I was actually going to lose. And then also just recognizing when I was down there that I was not going to get a row or plants started right up against the fence, that I was going to need another 5 or 6 feet away from that fence. Also, the side of my crop area closest to the hillside meandered a bit, and so that end point was not going to be the same per row. It got a little longer as I went farther away from the barn in that area. So taking the utility flags down, I had to pull them all back up, and I spent money on them, but I'm really glad that I did it, especially as a starter, because it helped me gauge that, how many plants I was going to fit in that area, and then also that I would be able to guesstimate if I needed any overflow space in that zone 1 area that I didn't plan on using. But if I needed to, there was some flat space in it I could have taken advantage of. Ultimately, it's just simple math that will determine how many plants you fit in your crop area. You need to know the dimensions of your crop area. You need to know what grid you're going to use to plant, and then just map it out on paper from there. I do highly recommend, if you're growing with plastic mulch and you're using drip irrigation, that you work with your irrigation supplier to help walk you through the best choices to make so that you have constant pressure for your irrigation system. That's why it was really hard for me to answer those questions online, because I think that it's more complicated than just how many plants you can plop down. If you're going to use drip irrigation, you have to take these other things into consideration. I hope this video was helpful. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments section. I'm happy to answer them. If it gets complex, I prefer to make a video about it than try and explain it in some characters. I think it's a lot easier. Thank you for watching. Happy farming.